Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 38 years old and I used to be an investigative journalist, but that feels like a lifetime ago. These days, I'm just a stranger to most of my family. That's how I felt when I walked into the Bennett Gallery's grand opening last fall. I hadn't been invited, but the moment my Aunt Josephine left me a cryptic voicemail hinting that the family was rewriting the past, I knew I had to show up. There was no way I was going to miss out on whatever was happening in that gallery. I parked my car a few blocks away to avoid being seen, and walked the rest of the way. As I got closer to the sleek modern building, I noticed the shiny cars parked along the curb, the expensive cocktails being served at the entrance, the crowd of influencers and art collectors I didn't know. And there I was, Clara Bennett, once the proud investigative journalist, walking in like an imposter. My leather jacket, boots scuffed from years of travel, and dark jeans stood out like a sore thumb among the glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos. I didn't belong there, but I didn't care. Inside, the space was pristine, with high ceilings and walls lined with abstract art. A floral installation dominated one corner of the room, and I decided to take a seat behind it, hoping to avoid anyone noticing me. But of course, I was already an outsider. As I sank into a chair, the whispers started. I could feel the eyes on me, the judgment. It was almost as if I wasn't supposed to be in my own family's gallery. Then Vanessa, my cousin Lucas's fiancée, took to the stage with a microphone in hand. She gave a speech about art and legacy, the gallery's new direction, and of course, my cousin Lucas's brilliant vision. I could see the smile on her face, the air of superiority in the way she spoke, and it made my blood boil. But it wasn't just her speech that caught my attention. It was her words that felt like a public slap to the face. And of course, we all know Clara, the family's conspiracy theorist, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She has her own ideas about the world, doesn't she? A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. My stomach twisted. I had expected something like this. After all, my years as an investigative journalist, challenging the family's carefully curated image, had left me on the outside. But to be humiliated like this in front of strangers, to be mocked for my beliefs, it stung. I opened my mouth to respond, to speak up, but the words didn't come. Instead, the room fell silent. A familiar voice broke through the tension. Mr. Ellsworth, a retired patron of the gallery, stood up from his seat near the back of the room. His weathered face and silver hair gave him the appearance of a man who had seen it all. And when he spoke, it carried weight. "Vanessa," he said with a quiet, steady voice, "maybe you should remember who exposed the art forgery scandal a few years back. Clara here is the one who brought the truth to light, even if some people in this room would rather forget it." Vanessa's smile faltered. The crowd went quiet, the energy shifting from one of uncomfortable laughter to an uneasy hush. "Mr. Hager." Ellsworth turned his gaze to me and gave me a respectful nod before sitting back down. I felt a strange mix of humiliation and pride. Humiliated because I had been publicly embarrassed by my own family. Proud because even after all the years of being pushed aside, there were still people who remembered the work I'd done. People who respected me for the things I had fought for, even when my family hadn't. Vanessa shot me a glare, but the moment passed quickly as if it had never happened. I didn't need the recognition, but I wasn't going to let anyone forget who I was. And for the first time in years, I felt the fire inside me spark again. The family might have rewritten the past, but I wasn't going anywhere. The meeting was set up at my family's law firm, the kind of place where mahogany desks and polished leather chairs made everything feel official. If there was ever a moment I wished I could just turn around and walk out, it was now. I hadn't spoken to my step-uncle Martin in years, but his smug smile when I walked into the conference room made it clear he hadn't forgotten about me. It was all part of his game, always playing the nice guy while pulling the strings from the shadows. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him like he was some sort of power player. And maybe he was. After all, he had the law firm, the money, and the reputation that came with being a Bennett by marriage. But he didn't have the one thing I had, the truth. I took my seat at the long, dark table, my eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. My Aunt Josephine sat at one end, her face tight with worry. She looked older than I remembered. Tired. but it was Martin I couldn't take my eyes off of. He was like a vulture, circling, waiting for the moment he could swoop in and take what was mine. "Clara," Martin said, his voice smooth, controlled. "I'm glad you could join us today." I didn't respond right away, letting the tension hang in the air. My mind raced as I prepared myself for what was coming. I could feel it. Something was off, and I was about to find out why. A woman from the law firm handed me a thick packet of papers, setting it in front of me. "This is the updated will," she said, her tone clinical, devoid of emotion. "Your late Uncle Robert made some changes to his estate." I glanced at the papers, and something inside me twisted. I'd been named as the legal co-heir to the Bennett Gallery Trust, tasked with overseeing its integrity if anything ever happened to my uncle. That had always been the plan. At least, that was the promise he'd made. The lawyer cleared her throat, pulling my attention back to the moment. "I regret to inform you, Clara, that you've been excluded from the will entirely." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't show it, of course. I kept my face blank, my breathing steady. But inside, my heart was racing. Martin smiled. Not a pleasant smile, but the kind you give when you know you've already won. "It's all quite clear," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "Uncle Robert's wishes have changed, and now the gallery will be passed down to Lucas, your cousin. He and Vanessa will assume full control." I clenched my fists under the table. "What are you talking about?" My voice was steady, but it took everything in me to keep it that way. "You're telling me I'm being cut out of the inheritance?" Josephine's face twisted in discomfort, but she didn't speak. She never did, not when it mattered. Martin enjoyed the silence, letting the weight of his words sink in. "That's right," he said. "It was a decision made by Robert before his passing. It's been clearly outlined in this updated version of the will." I reached for the papers, my eyes scanning the fine print, but something caught my attention, an inconsistency. A name scratched out. My name. I froze, my heart pounding as the words stared back at me. Clara Bennett. Removed. It didn't make sense. My uncle had always said I would be the one to safeguard the gallery's legacy. I remembered his promise, clear as day. But now, Martin had manipulated the situation to erase me. "How is this possible?" I whispered, my voice breaking just a little, but enough to show I was rattled. Martin tilted his head, that smug smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. "The will was updated shortly before Robert passed. You weren't privy to the changes, Clara. I'm afraid that's just how it is." I swallowed hard, feeling the anger rise inside me. "You tampered with it." Martin's eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. "I don't know what you're implying," he said smoothly, but I could hear the slight edge in his voice. "The trust was legally revised, and you've been removed." I slammed my hand down on the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. "This isn't right." The lawyer, looking increasingly uncomfortable, cleared her throat. "Clara, if you have concerns about the validity of the will, I suggest you take it to court, but for now, this is legally binding." I stood up abruptly, pushing the papers aside. "You manipulated the will. You changed the trust. I'm not leaving here without proof." Martin's smirk faltered for a brief moment. "You're wasting your time, Clara." I wasn't going to back down. I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I stormed out of the room, the doors slamming behind me, but I didn't care. I had a fight on my hands now, and I wasn't going to lose. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person who might have answers, Eli. He was a former colleague and a tech expert who owed me a favor. If anyone could help me figure out what had really happened to that will, it was him. "Hey, Eli," I said as soon as he picked up. "I need your help. There's been some foul play with my uncle's will. Can you find the original version for me?" I could hear him hesitate for a moment before answering. "I'm on it, but you need to be careful, Clara. If they've covered their tracks, this won't be easy." "Just find it," I snapped, then softened my tone. "Please, I need to know the truth." "I'll get back to you," Eli said, before hanging up. I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of it all settle in. The will was tampered with, and Martin, the man who had been manipulating everything from the shadows, had just taken everything from me. But I wasn't going to let him win. This wasn't just about the gallery or the inheritance anymore. It was about something much bigger, something that was worth fighting for. and I was going to get it back. The old Bennett estate stood like a shadow of its former self. A grand house once filled with light, laughter, and life now seemed to groan under the weight of years of neglect. The paint was chipped, the garden overrun with weeds, and the stone steps creaked under my weight as I climbed toward the front door. My stomach churned with a mix of anxiety and determination. Eli had come through. He'd found fragments of the original will, the one that named me as co-heir and advisor to the gallery's legacy, buried deep in a digital archive. The problem was the files were incomplete, scrambled, corrupted. It was as if someone had tried to bury the truth. That's why I was here. The house hadn't been lived in since my uncle's death, but it still smelled like him, the faint scent of old tobacco and aged whiskey. The front door was unlocked, just like Eli had said. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the silence settling over me like a weight. I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia as I walked through the dimly lit halls. This house had been a constant in my life, even if I hadn't been invited to it as often as I should have. My Uncle Robert had raised me, after all, before life got in the way and things between us grew distant. It was here, in the basement, that he kept the most valuable pieces of his collection, the things that had inspired his life's work. I made my way through the house, past the grand staircase, and into the hallway that led to the basement. My hand rested on the railing, but I didn't need it to steady myself. I wasn't here for memories. I was here for answers. The basement door was old and heavy, creaking loudly as I pulled it open. The stairs beneath me were steep, the air thick with the scent of dampness and mildew. It was colder down here, but I barely noticed. I had one goal in mind: finding the archives. I turned on the light and immediately noticed the rows of dusty cabinets stacked along the far wall. My uncle's old filing cabinets. These had been his pride and joy, the collection of legal and financial records, documents that had shaped the gallery's legacy. But it wasn't the cabinets I needed to worry about. It was the locked one in the back corner. I could feel my pulse quicken as I approached. This was the one. I could tell by the way it stood apart from the others, slightly more worn, as if it had been used more frequently. I knelt down in front of it, the cool metal under my hands sending a jolt through me. I knew I was risking a lot by being here, by even attempting to break into this cabinet. But at this point, I had no choice. Martin had played his hand, and I needed to find something that could prove the trust had been tampered with. I grabbed my tools from the bag I'd brought and started working. My hands were steady despite the nerves buzzing beneath my skin. I had always been good at this. Good at figuring out puzzles, at getting what I wanted when no one thought I could. This was just another one of those moments. The lock clicked open with a satisfying snap. I breathed a sigh of relief and pulled the door open. Inside, the cabinet was filled with stacks of files, neatly organized in manila folders. At the top of the pile, there was an envelope that stood out, its edges slightly bent, the paper a little more worn than the rest. It had no label, but I knew. I could feel it. This was the one. I pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside, I found the original trust documents, pages and pages of legal jargon that had been revised and redacted. But what struck me were the annotations at the bottom of each page, the notes in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. Clara to be named co-heir and advisor to the gallery's legacy. It must be protected, one note read. Another one. Lucas to oversee financial decisions, but Clara has final say. There was no mistaking it. Robert had never intended for Martin or anyone else to control the gallery. It had always been my responsibility. And Martin had done everything in his power to erase me from that legacy. But there was more, tucked at the very back of the folder, buried under more notes and documents, was something that sent a chill down my spine. Evidence of a digital transaction. A small slip of paper with a string of numbers and a date. I recognized it immediately. Martin had accessed the files. He had altered the trust documents himself. I clenched my teeth, my hands shaking. I was right. Martin had done this. He had stolen my inheritance, my future, and now I had proof. But as I took in the documents, something else caught my eye. A file tucked under the last piece of paper. It was a legal contract of some sort. An agreement I hadn't seen before. I reached for it, and as I pulled it out, I noticed the words at the top. Forgery and fraudulent document transfer agreement. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about the gallery. This was something far worse. Martin had been laundering stolen art, using the gallery as a front. The magnitude of what I was holding hit me all at once. Martin wasn't just trying to erase me from the gallery's legacy. He had been running a criminal operation right under everyone's noses. And now I had the evidence to expose him. I stuffed the papers back into the folder and closed the cabinet with a slam, my heart racing. The hunt was far from over, but I had what I needed. I wasn't going to let Martin get away with this. But as I turned to leave, I felt a flicker of doubt. I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. Eli. I needed Eli to break down the digital footprints, to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Martin had tampered with the files. And I needed something else, an ally, someone who could help me expose the corruption that had festered in my family for years. I reached for my phone and dialed Eli's number. "Clara," he said, his voice full of concern. "What's going on?" "I found the proof," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. "Martin's behind everything. He's been forging documents, laundering stolen art through the gallery. We're going to bring him down." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" Eli asked, his voice grave. "Absolutely," I said, a fire burning in my chest. "And this time, I'm not letting him win." I hung up, taking one last look at the darkened basement. The fight had just begun, but now I was ready to finish it. I sat at the edge of the old wooden bench outside Henry Lawson's nursing home, the afternoon sun casting a long shadow across the cracked pavement. The smell of freshly cut grass hung in the air, mixing with the stale scent of hospital antiseptic that wafted from the building behind me. I had made this trip for one reason only, to convince Henry Lawson to help me expose the full extent of Martin's betrayal. Henry was a reclusive art historian who had once been Robert's closest business partner. The two of them had shared a vision for the gallery, but when Robert passed, Henry had retreated from the art world. Some said he had grown tired of the politics. Others said he was just done with people. Either way, I hadn't spoken to him in years. When I told Eli I was going to see Henry, he'd warned me it wasn't going to be easy. Henry wasn't someone who trusted easily, and now, given everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to break through his defenses either. I pulled myself up from the bench, brushing the dust off my jeans, and approached the door to the nursing home. The receptionist behind the counter gave me a bored look as I signed in. "Room 206, she said, her eyes never leaving her phone. I thanked her and headed down the dim hallway, the faint sound of murmured conversations and distant footsteps echoing through the sterile space. When I reached room 206, I paused. Henry's name was written in large, bold letters above the door, the whiteboard next to it filled with his daily medication schedule and reminders. I took a deep breath and knocked softly. There was no answer at first, and just as I was about to knock again, I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps from inside. The door creaked open, revealing Henry, wearing a faded cardigan over a shirt that had seen better days. His once sharp, calculating eyes were clouded by age, but there was still something fierce in his gaze. "Clara," he said, his voice raspy, as though he hadn't spoken in days. "What brings you here?" I stepped inside and took in the sight of his room. A small, cluttered space with bookshelves lined with old tomes, an art history magazine on the bedside table, and a few pieces of abstract art that seemed out of place in such a sterile setting. Henry had always been a man of principle, even in his retirement. But now, surrounded by the trappings of his own isolation, I wasn't sure what kind of man he was anymore. "I need your help," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need you to verify something for me." Henry raised an eyebrow, studying me carefully. "I'm not in the business of helping anyone, least of all people who come around after all these years." I swallowed, feeling a slight pang of regret. "I know I haven't kept in touch, but this is important. My Uncle Robert's legacy is being erased, and I believe Martin has been tampering with the will and the trust. I need you to testify that Robert's original intent was to have me take over the gallery." Henry's gaze softened for a brief moment, but his face quickly regained its familiar sternness. He looked away, staring out the window at the overgrown courtyard outside, lost in thought. "You don't know what you're asking, Clara," he muttered. "Martin is not someone you can just go up against. He's been in this game longer than you and me combined." "I'm not afraid of him," I said, more confident than I felt. "I know what he's done, Henry. He's been manipulating the gallery's finances, forging documents, and using the trust as a front to launder stolen art. I have the proof. I just need you to back me up." For a long moment, Henry said nothing. His eyes flickered from the window back to me, his lips pressed tight, as though he was weighing something in his mind. "Why should I help you, Clara?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. "After all this time, why now?" "Because it's the right thing to do," I said. "I've spent years trying to make a difference, trying to expose the truth. And now my family is trying to erase it all for their own gain. I can't let them get away with it. You know Robert would never let this happen." Henry's eyes darkened. He stood slowly from his chair and walked over to a small desk cluttered with papers and old art books. He rummaged through the piles, finally pulling out a key and walking toward a small filing cabinet in the corner. "Robert always had a way of seeing through people," Henry said quietly, as he unlocked the cabinet and retrieved a thin folder. "He kept everything, the contracts, the financial records, the legal agreements. But he also kept something else, something you might find interesting." He handed me the folder and I opened it carefully. Inside were several documents, letters between Robert and Henry, notes on the gallery's founding, and at the bottom of the pile, a handwritten note from Robert himself. It was dated 2 years before his death. The ink was faded, but the words were unmistakable. "Clara must oversee the gallery's future. She has the integrity to protect it." I felt a knot form in my throat as I read the words aloud. He meant for me to take over. Henry nodded slowly. Robert knew what he was doing. He knew the gallery needed someone with passion, someone who wasn't just in it for the money. He trusted you. But Martin, he's been playing this game for too long. I looked up at Henry, a mixture of gratitude and determination flooding my chest. "I can't do this alone. I need you, Henry. You're the only one who can confirm Robert's true wishes." For the first time since I walked in, Henry met my gaze with a look of resolve. "All right," he said, his voice steadier than before. "I'll help you, but you need to be careful. Martin won't back down, and neither will the people he's got on his side." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "I'm ready, whatever it takes." Henry gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Then let's make sure Robert's legacy stays intact." As I left the nursing home, the weight of what we were about to do settled on my shoulders, but for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. With Henry's help, I might just be able to expose Martin and restore the gallery's true legacy. The fight was just beginning, but now, at least, I had an ally. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and long nights spent reviewing the evidence. Eli had worked tirelessly to decrypt the files I'd found in the Bennett estate, and his findings were as damning as I had hoped. But there was still one piece of the puzzle I needed: Robert's hidden archives, the ones Martin had likely been using to cover his tracks. Henry had mentioned them in passing during our conversation at the nursing home. The archives were something Robert had set up, a secret digital vault containing records that Martin couldn't tamper with. Henry didn't know the exact location, but he had a hunch, and he promised to get back to me. When my phone rang at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon, I didn't need to check the caller ID. I knew it was Henry. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse but with an edge of excitement. "I think I found it. The access codes for the archive. But you'll have to act quickly. Martin's already closing in on some of Robert's old files. The more time we waste, the harder it'll be to get in." I stood up from the table where I'd been reviewing the latest batch of financial documents and grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. "Where do I need to go?" I asked, my pulse quickening. Henry gave me an address, one that didn't exist on any map I could find. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, far enough from the Bennett estate to avoid suspicion, but close enough for it to be a logical location for Robert's hidden stash. "I'll meet you there," I said, already heading for the door. "And Henry, thank you." I hung up, grabbed my keys, and sped off. The warehouse was on the edge of town, wedged between a dilapidated row of businesses that looked like they hadn't seen the light of day in decades. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed how eerily quiet the area was, the only sounds being the distant hum of traffic and the rustling of wind through dead trees. I parked my car and stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel. The warehouse loomed in front of me, its broken windows and rusting doors a testament to years of neglect. I walked up to the entrance, feeling a familiar knot in my stomach. This was the kind of place where secrets were kept, hidden away from prying eyes. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the hollow space. The musty air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew hung in the corners. There, amidst the decay, stood Henry, holding a small, weathered laptop in his hands. He looked up when I entered, his face drawn but determined. "It's all here," he said, gesturing to the laptop. "Robert's encrypted files. If we get this right, we can expose Martin once and for all." I nodded and moved toward him, taking a seat at the small metal table in the middle of the room. Henry opened the laptop and clicked a few keys, his fingers moving quickly over the keys as the screen flickered to life. On the screen, a login page appeared with a string of characters in a cryptic font. "This is it," Henry muttered, typing in a code. The machine hummed for a moment, then stopped. The screen blinked, and a new window appeared, one that looked entirely different from the cluttered mess of old files and documents that I'd seen before. "Here we go," I said under my breath. The window was filled with folders, each labeled with a variety of cryptic names. My eyes scanned the screen, my fingers hovering over the mouse as I searched for something familiar. And then I saw it: Gallery Trust Documents, a folder buried under layers of old financial spreadsheets and receipts. I clicked on it, and my heart skipped a beat as the folder opened to reveal several files: contracts, transaction logs, emails, and at the very bottom, a video file labeled Final Message. I glanced at Henry, who was watching me intently. "What's the video?" he asked. "Only one way to find out," I said, clicking on the file. The video opened, and the screen flickered to life, revealing my Uncle Robert, his face more weathered than I remembered, but still filled with the same sharp intelligence that had always made him a force to be reckoned with. "Clara," Robert's voice crackled from the speakers, his image slightly grainy. "If you're watching this, it means something's gone wrong. I don't trust Martin, and I'm afraid he'll try to take everything from you. The gallery, the trust, your future, everything. You have to protect it. You have to expose him." I froze, watching as Robert continued to speak. "You've always had the integrity to keep this legacy alive, Clara. Don't let him rewrite history. This is your fight now, and you must not back down. If you find this footage, you'll know what I'm talking about. The truth is buried deeper than you think, but you'll have to dig, just like I did. Good luck." The screen went black, and for a moment, I sat in stunned silence. Henry was equally still, his eyes wide as the weight of Robert's words sank in. "So it was all true," Henry said softly. "Martin is the one behind all of this, and he's been trying to erase you from the beginning." I nodded, my mind racing as I replayed the video in my head. Robert had known, even at the end, that I was the one who needed to protect the gallery. But more than that, he had left me the key to exposing everything: Martin's corruption, the laundering scheme, and his manipulation of the will. "We need to get this footage out," I said, already thinking about the next steps. "We can't let Martin cover this up. We have to make sure everyone knows the truth." Henry looked at me, his expression serious. "It's dangerous, Clara. If we release this, Martin won't just come after you. He'll come after everyone who's involved." I met his gaze, my resolve hardening. "I've already lost everything. I'm not going to let him get away with it." Henry nodded, understanding. "All right, let's make sure this gets into the right hands." As we packed up the laptop and the files, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was finally within reach. And for the first time in a long time, I had hope. But the real battle was just beginning. And I wasn't going to back down this time. The gallery's legacy auction was a few days away, and the tension in the air was palpable. Invitations had been sent to some of the most influential art collectors, patrons, and media outlets in the country. Lucas and Vanessa were preparing to unveil the newly restored collection, which, unbeknownst to most, had been manipulated and in some cases, even fabricated by Martin. I had seen their rehearsed smiles and their glossy speeches. They had everything set up to pretend like nothing was wrong, that the gallery had been revived and was flourishing under their guidance. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, the weight of the upcoming confrontation sitting heavily on my shoulders. I had spent the last few days preparing, gathering all the evidence I needed to expose Martin's corruption. Eli had helped me piece together the timeline, and Henry had agreed to testify as a witness to Robert's true intentions. Now all that was left was getting the truth out into the open. The phone rang just as I was finishing up. It was Marianne, our lawyer. "Clara, you're on schedule, right? We have everything ready for the press release tomorrow." I paused for a moment, taking in a deep breath. "Yes, everything is in place. Patrick Doyle is lined up for the press conference, and I've sent him all the materials. The video, the trust documents, the records, everything." Marianne's voice turned more serious. "Good. I want you to remember this is going to be a high-stakes game. Once we drop the bomb, there's no going back. The fallout will be massive." "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was beating faster than I liked. "I'll be there early tomorrow to oversee everything. I'll make sure we have the angle we need to bury him." "Just remember," Marianne warned, "this is as much about your future as it is about the galleries. Once this breaks, Lucas and Vanessa won't be the only ones with targets on their backs." I nodded, though I could feel the nerves threatening to surface. The truth was, I wasn't just fighting for the gallery anymore. This was personal. This was about reclaiming what had been taken from me, about restoring Robert's legacy, and about finally standing up to the people who had tried to erase me. The night of the auction arrived. The venue was bustling with excitement, the hum of conversations mixing with the soft clinking of glasses. Expensive champagne was flowing freely, and the guests were admiring the artwork displayed on every wall. But beneath the surface of the glittering event, there was a storm brewing. I had arrived early, dressed in black to blend in, though I knew I stood out in more ways than one. The moment I walked in, I could feel the cold stares of the people who had once been close to me. Vanessa and Lucas were holding court, as usual, surrounded by collectors and socialites. Their smiles were polished, but I could see the flicker of anxiety in their eyes as they set up their speeches and prepared for their moment in the spotlight. I stood near the back, behind a massive floral arrangement, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the whispers as the guests saw me, some curious, some surprised, but most of them simply unsure of what to make of my unexpected presence. Minutes later, everything went silent as Patrick Doyle, the veteran art journalist, walked to the front. He was a grizzled, no-nonsense journalist who had seen it all and written about most of it. He gave me a brief nod when he saw me, then turned his attention to the crowd, ready to begin his statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patrick's voice rang out across the room, drawing everyone's attention. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the future of the Bennett Gallery. It is my privilege to be here, and it is an even greater privilege to finally expose the truth behind the gallery's transformation." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's eyes flicked nervously toward me while Lucas tried to keep his composure, but the unease was palpable, and I could see the cracks starting to show in their perfectly constructed facade. "Before we proceed with the auction, we have a special presentation," Patrick continued, looking at me with a knowing glance. "One that will shed light on the legacy of the Bennett Gallery and the man who started it all, Robert Bennett. What you're about to see may change everything you thought you knew about the gallery's origins." The large screen behind Patrick flickered to life, and I heard Vanessa's breath catch as the familiar face of Robert Bennett appeared, his image a little grainy but unmistakable. The room fell silent. Robert's voice came through clearly, despite the poor video quality. "If you're watching this, it means something has gone wrong. I don't trust Martin, and I'm afraid he will try to take everything from you. The gallery, the trust, your future, everything. You have to protect it. You have to expose him." The room was still, save for the occasional gasp. Patrick stood still beside the screen, letting the words sink in. Vanessa's face was a picture of shock, her hand gripping Lucas's arm as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Robert continued in the video, his voice steady and firm. "Clara Bennett is the rightful heir to the gallery's legacy. She will protect it. She will expose the truth." There was a long pause, and I could feel the weight of the moment settle over the room. The once manicured image of the Bennett Gallery, of Vanessa and Lucas as its shining leaders, was falling apart. As the video ended, Patrick turned back to face the room, his voice carrying the full weight of the truth. "What you've just witnessed is the real story behind the Bennett Gallery, not the version you've been told. The person who has been hiding behind the scenes, manipulating Robert's trust, is Martin Bennett." A stunned silence filled the room, broken only by the occasional murmur. Patrick wasn't done. Martin Bennett has not only tampered with the will, but has been involved in fraudulent activities that go far beyond what anyone has realized. Stolen art, manipulated finances. This gallery, which we have all admired, was built on lies. A slow clap began in the back of the room. It was Mr. Ellsworth. His applause was the only sound at first, but slowly others joined in. The gallery patrons, the ones who had once stood by Martin, were now starting to turn on him. Vanessa's face drained of color, and Lucas looked like he had been punched in the stomach. But the moment that struck hardest was when Martin himself entered the room, having arrived just in time to witness his empire crumble. He looked from the crowd to the screen, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip. His eyes flickered with rage, but there was no way out for him now. I stood in the back, my arms crossed, watching as his carefully constructed world came crashing down. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. This was no longer about revenge, it was about justice. The crowd continued to murmur, some asking questions, some already preparing to leave. The damage had been done. As I turned to walk away, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around to find Patrick standing beside me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You did good, Clara," he said, his voice low. "You've got more guts than most of the people in that room combined." I gave him a small smile. The truth always comes out, one way or another. And just like that, it was over. The room was in chaos, but I walked out of the gallery, my heart light for the first time in years. Martin's empire was crumbling, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I had won. The evening was supposed to be a triumph, the grand reveal, the start of a new era for the Bennett Gallery. Martin had worked tirelessly to craft the perfect narrative, with Lucas and Vanessa at the helm. Their vision was supposed to be the future, an artful facade built on a carefully curated selection of paintings, sculptures, and antiques that would restore the gallery's reputation. But none of that mattered now. I stood outside the gallery, waiting for the final act to unfold. The auction had begun, but I knew it wasn't the art that would dominate the night. No, it was the story, the truth. And the truth had already been exposed. I could hear the low murmur of voices inside, the clinking of glasses, the sound of an auctioneer's gavel striking, and the collective gasps that had followed the video of Robert. It was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. I took a deep breath and stepped into the gallery. The buzz of the crowd hit me immediately. A low hum of confusion and whispered questions. Eyes were glued to the stage at the front, where Vanessa stood, nervously adjusting her microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice wavering slightly, but trying to hold on to the confident tone she always carried. "Thank you so much for being here tonight to celebrate the next chapter of the Bennett Gallery. We're honored to share this legacy with all of you." The crowd politely applauded, but the energy was off. There was an undercurrent of tension, a hint of disbelief. I could see it in their eyes. They'd heard the whispers, watched the video, seen the evidence. They knew something had shifted. Vanessa cleared her throat. "I'd like to start by talking about the future of the gallery, about the vision Lucas and I have for its direction, for its integrity." Her words fell flat. I could tell she was struggling to keep the poise she'd relied on, but it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. No amount of rehearsed speech could fix the gaping hole in the gallery's credibility. Just as she was about to continue, the screen behind her flickered to life. The guests, already uneasy, fell silent. The screen displayed a still image. The same footage from earlier, but this time, instead of Robert's face, it was the cold, calculating expression of Martin Bennett. His image was grainy, his eyes sharp, his posture stiff. I felt a surge of satisfaction as the room grew still, like the entire crowd was holding their breath, waiting for what came next. The auctioneer looked confused, as did the other patrons, but no one moved. Martin's video began to play. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martin's voice came through the speakers, smoother than it had ever been. "If you're watching this, it means something has gone wrong. I've done what I had to do to preserve the future of the gallery, but I've come to realize that sometimes the truth can't be hidden forever. Clara Bennett is the rightful heir to the gallery's legacy." The room was dead silent. Vanessa's face turned pale, and I could see Lucas stiffen beside her. They were both caught off guard, their rehearsed smiles crumbling into stunned expressions. "This is the end of the line for me," Martin's voice continued in the recording. "But it's only the beginning for Clara. She's the one who will restore what was always meant to be hers. And you'll know the truth. I've made sure of that." The video cut off abruptly, and the room was plunged into an uncomfortable quiet. No one moved for a long moment. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the soft shuffle of guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then someone whispered. Then another voice joined in, and soon a cacophony of conversations began to swell. The room buzzed with confusion, anger, and disbelief. "What the hell?" someone said. "Is that for real? Clara? Is she the one who should be running this place? What does this mean?" Vanessa stood frozen on stage, her hands gripping the microphone tightly. Her eyes darted between the guests, looking for some sign of solidarity, but it wasn't coming. Lucas was no better, his face a mask of shock and frustration. I couldn't help the smirk that tugged at my lips. This was the moment they'd been dreading, but the real spectacle was just about to begin. Martin himself, his actual presence, was coming. I knew it the moment I saw him walk through the back door of the gallery, his confident stride almost comical now. The man who had orchestrated everything, who had controlled the gallery's future, was about to face the consequences of his actions. His eyes scanned the room, falling first on Vanessa and Lucas, then moving to the crowd of patrons who had begun to murmur with growing anger. "Martin," someone called out, their voice shaking with disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" He didn't answer. Instead, he made his way to the front, standing next to the microphone that Vanessa had just abandoned. The room quieted, but the tension was thick enough to slice through with a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martin began, his voice dripping with false humility, "I'd like to take this opportunity to explain what you just saw. The video, it's a misunderstanding. Clara." But before he could continue, a loud voice from the back of the room interrupted. "Misunderstanding," a wealthy collector shouted. "You've been running a scam for years, and you're still standing here like nothing happened?" The crowd erupted in outrage, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Martin's face flushed, his composed facade cracking under the weight of the truth he couldn't hide anymore. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice rising above the chaos. "Please," she pleaded, her voice strained. "We need to discuss this calmly. This is not what it seems." "Not what it seems?" another voice called. "You've been lying to all of us. You've been lying about the legacy of the gallery, about the art, and about everything else. How do you explain that?" As more people shouted and demanded answers, the tension in the room became unbearable. It was clear. Martin's empire was falling apart, piece by piece, in front of everyone. The guests were no longer patrons or buyers. They were witnesses, and they were demanding justice. "Enough," Martin finally snapped, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "This isn't how this was supposed to go." His hands trembled as he slammed his fist down onto the table, but no one flinched. Not anymore. The auctioneer stepped forward, trying to regain some semblance of order. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to—" "No," I cut him off, stepping out from behind the floral arrangement, walking toward the front. "This auction is over. The truth is out, and it's time to end the lies." I turned toward Martin, my gaze steady. "Your empire is crumbling, Martin, and it's not just the gallery you're going to lose." The crowd went silent. Every eye was on me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the moment settle into my bones. This wasn't just about the gallery anymore. This was about everything I had lost, my family, my past, and the future I was finally taking back. The final curtain was about to fall, and it wasn't going to be pretty for Martin. The courthouse was cold, its sterile walls lined with wood paneling and marble floors that reflected the stark, unforgiving light. It had been weeks since the auction, and the fallout from that night had reached far beyond the gallery. The press had run story after story, but it wasn't just about the gallery anymore. It was about the corruption that had been festering in my family for years. I walked into the courtroom, my heart pounding, the weight of the coming battle sitting heavily on my shoulders. The legal teams were already in place. Martin had hired a high-profile lawyer, one with a reputation for pulling off the impossible. But I had Marianne, my trusted lawyer, and everything I needed to prove my case. More importantly, I had the truth. The gallery was at stake, but this wasn't just about the gallery. This was about more than money. This was about restoring Robert's legacy and ensuring that no one, not Martin or anyone else, could rewrite history. I sat at the defendant's table, my eyes scanning the room as the judge entered. The gavel struck with finality, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," the judge announced, his voice deep and commanding. I turned to face Martin and his lawyer. Martin was wearing his usual calm, smug expression, as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. The people in the courtroom, the patrons who had once trusted him, had seen the cracks in his perfect facade. They'd seen him for what he was, a man who thought he could manipulate the gallery and everyone around him for his own gain. Marianne sat beside me, her eyes scanning the room with a sharp focus. She was prepared. I could feel it. She had all the evidence, the forged documents, the tampered will, the trail of financial records that led straight to Martin. She had no intention of letting him slip through the cracks. The prosecutor called the first witness to the stand. Henry Lawson. I couldn't help but feel a small spark of gratitude as Henry took his place. The art historian, who had once been so hesitant, now stood firm. He was the key witness who could confirm Robert's original wishes for the gallery. Henry was sworn in, and I watched as he adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat before beginning. "Mr. Lawson, you were a close business partner of Robert Bennett. Is that correct?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Henry replied. "We worked together for many years. We were co-founders of the gallery." "And you were also a witness to Robert's final wishes regarding the gallery's future?" the prosecutor pressed. "I was," Henry said, his voice unwavering. "Robert made it very clear to me that Clara Bennett was to take over the gallery's management and legacy if anything were to happen to him. He trusted her, and he wanted her to safeguard the gallery." The room was quiet as the weight of Henry's words sunk in. "Did Robert express any concerns about Martin Bennett's involvement in the gallery's management?" the prosecutor asked. Henry hesitated, glancing at Martin, who sat with his lawyer, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes," Henry said slowly, his eyes narrowing. Robert was wary of Martin. He didn't trust him. He feared Martin would manipulate the gallery's financials for his own gain, which is why Robert took steps to protect Clara's role in the gallery's future. The judge nodded, acknowledging Henry's testimony, and turned to Martin's lawyer, who stood to cross-examine. Martin's lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit, stood up and walked toward Henry. His voice was smooth and calculated. "Mr. Lawson, you're saying that Robert Bennett expressed these concerns to you before his death?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "But isn't it true that Robert Bennett also signed an updated version of the will just before his passing, which removed Clara as the co-heir and instead gave control of the gallery to Lucas and Vanessa?" Henry's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Yes, Robert signed an updated will, but I was made aware that the will had been tampered with. There were discrepancies in the documents, and I believe that Martin manipulated the will to his advantage." Martin's lawyer pressed on. "So you're claiming that Robert's final will, which was legally drafted and executed, was not valid?" Henry met his gaze squarely. "What I'm claiming, Mr. Green, is that Martin Bennett manipulated the legal documents and forged Robert's final wishes to suit his own agenda. The original will and the documents I've seen make it clear that Robert wanted Clara to oversee the gallery's future." "This new will? It's a fraud." There was a murmur in the courtroom as Henry's words settled in. The tension was palpable. Even the judge seemed to take a moment to absorb the gravity of what had just been said. Martin's lawyer tried to maintain his composure. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Lawson is speculating." The judge raised his hand, cutting him off. "I will allow Mr. Lawson to continue with his testimony." Martin's lawyer clenched his jaw, but he knew the game was changing. He had no way to refute what Henry had just said. Henry was a credible witness, and his statement held more weight than Martin could ever have imagined. After Henry's testimony, the room shifted. We had the proof we needed. The jury was already starting to look at Martin with suspicion. It was time for the next part of our case, the financial records. Marianne stood up, and I could feel my pulse quicken as she called Eli to the stand. He had worked tirelessly to gather the evidence, to decipher the digital files that had been manipulated by Martin, and now he was going to show exactly how deep the corruption ran. Eli walked confidently to the stand, his nerdy demeanor belying the sharpness of his mind. He was ready. "Mr. Eli Carter, you've reviewed the gallery's financial records and the tampered will. Can you explain what you found? Marianne asked. Eli nodded, adjusting his glasses as he clicked through a few slides on the projector. The numbers appeared on the screen, detailed spreadsheets showing massive discrepancies in the gallery's accounts, money that had been funneled through shell companies and false invoices. I found evidence that Martin Bennett had been siphoning funds from the gallery's accounts, Eli explained, his voice clear and precise. He created false invoices, moved money through fake accounts, and used the gallery's name to launder stolen art. These financial discrepancies traced directly back to Martin. The courtroom was in an uproar as the prosecution displayed the evidence, and Martin's face turned an ashen gray. The crowd reacted with disbelief, but no one seemed to doubt the validity of Eli's findings. The evidence was irrefutable. Martin's lawyer stood, attempting to salvage what he could of the case, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge turned to Martin, his expression stern. Mr. Bennett, you stand accused of fraud, embezzlement, and the manipulation of legal documents. How do you plead? Martin, who had been silent for most of the proceedings, stood up. His eyes were cold, his expression calculated. For a moment, I thought he might still try to lie his way out of it, but then he did something unexpected. I plead guilty, he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I did it because I thought I had no other choice. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel fell. Then this court finds you guilty as charged. You will be sentenced after further deliberations. I sat back in my chair, my heart racing with a mix of relief and disbelief. Martin had finally admitted it, and the gallery, my uncle's legacy, was mine to protect. The battle was over, but the fight had changed me. I had faced the truth. And now I could begin to rebuild what had been torn apart. As I stood to leave, I looked at the gallery's future, uncertain but hopeful. There was much to be done, but I wasn't alone anymore. The truth had won, and that was all that mattered. And as I left the courtroom, I felt the weight of a long, hard journey finally lifting. The day after the courtroom verdict felt strangely quiet. The air was cool, the kind of crisp autumn morning that made everything feel like it was finally settling. For once, I didn't feel like I was being dragged from one crisis to the next. I had fought and won, but I wasn't sure what came next. All I knew was that Martin was facing charges. The gallery's trust had been reinstated under my name, and I could finally, after all these years, breathe. But there was one last thing to do. I drove to my uncle's estate, the place where it all began, where the gallery was conceived, where he'd raised me after my parents had disappeared into their own lives. The house stood as a relic of the past, tall, faded, its once grand exterior now weathered with age and neglect. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house that once represented everything I had loved and lost was the final place, where I needed to reclaim what was mine. I parked in the gravel driveway, staring at the tall oak tree in the front yard. It was the same tree where Robert and I had spent hours, him teaching me about art, about history, about life. It was under that very tree where he had promised me that one day I would be the one to preserve the gallery's legacy. Now it was time to close the chapter on the past. I grabbed a metal box from the passenger seat of my car and walked toward the oak tree. The box held the forged will, the one Martin had manipulated to steal everything from me. I'd kept it hidden for as long as I could, a constant reminder of how deep the betrayal ran. But now, with the truth exposed, it didn't need to exist anymore. The wind rustled the leaves, a sharp contrast to the stillness I felt inside. I stopped beneath the tree and opened the box. I pulled out the crumpled, faded will, feeling the weight of years of lies and manipulation. This was the document that had almost stolen everything from me, my inheritance, my identity, my family's history. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at it, the remnants of my uncle's words on the yellowing paper. Then, without hesitation, I struck a match and held it to the corner of the will. The flame flickered and caught, the paper curling and blackening with each passing second. As it burned, I could almost hear Robert's voice in my head. "Let go, Clara. It's over." I watched the ashes fall to the ground, the last piece of the past disintegrating in the fire. When it was reduced to nothing but charred remnants, I felt a strange release. For the first time in years, the weight of the world didn't feel like it was crushing me. I could finally move forward. A soft click interrupted the silence. I turned to see Eli standing a few feet away, his hands tucked in the pockets of his jacket. His eyes softened when he saw the ashes at my feet. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I nodded slowly, my gaze still on the smoldering remains. "Yeah, I think I am." Eli stepped closer, offering me a small, comforting smile. "You did it. You took back what was yours." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Eli chuckled softly, his hands still in his pockets. "You don't have to. Just seeing you take charge again, knowing you finally got control of the gallery, it's all the thanks I need." We stood in silence for a while, just watching the last of the smoke rise into the air. The fire was almost gone, and with it, the last remnants of my uncle's betrayal. I knew the fight wasn't over. There would be legal battles to come, more paperwork to sift through, and the weight of running the gallery on my shoulders. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready for it. After a while, I turned to Eli. "The gallery's not going to run itself. I've got a lot of work ahead of me." "I'm not going anywhere," Eli said with a grin. "You've got a lot of rebuilding to do, but you don't have to do it alone." His words meant more than he knew. I didn't know what the future held for me or the gallery, but I knew I had something more valuable than a legacy of art and history. I had people who cared, who believed in me, and that was all that mattered. I turned and started walking toward my car. Eli fell into step beside me. "What's next?" he asked, his voice curious. "Next?" I repeated, looking up at the sky. "Next, I rebuild. I don't just want to preserve the gallery's legacy. I want to make it something more, something real. I want to honor Robert's vision, but on my terms." Eli smiled, his eyes reflecting the same quiet confidence I felt inside. "Then I guess I'll be here every step of the way." We got into the car and I started the engine, the low hum of the car matching the calm, steady beat of my heart. As we drove away from the estate, I couldn't help but glance back at the old oak tree. The past was gone. The lies had been burned away, and the future was waiting. I wasn't sure exactly what that future would look like, but I knew one thing for sure. It was mine to build. And for the first time in years, I wasn't scared. A few weeks later, I sat in my office at the gallery, watching as workers began to prepare the space for its next chapter. The walls were being repainted, the exhibits were being rearranged, and the first real pieces of art that Robert had once collected were being brought in. I had big plans for the gallery, plans that would stay true to my uncle's vision, but would also honor my own voice, my own legacy. It wasn't just about the art anymore. It was about protecting something far more valuable, the truth. And as I sat there, looking at the beautiful pieces around me, I realized that for the first time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. It was an overcast morning in the city, the kind where the sky was gray and heavy, but the air felt fresh, crisp, like the world was waiting for something to happen. I stood outside City Hall, my hands tucked into the pockets of my jacket, as I waited for the moment to arrive. Today wasn't about the gallery or the trust, or even about Martin and the years of lies he'd built. Today was about something simpler, something I had nearly forgotten in the chaos of everything else: my name. The press conference was set to begin in half an hour. The small room inside City Hall would be packed with reporters, former critics, art collectors, and patrons. And today, they wouldn't just be there to talk about the gallery. They'd be there to hear my name, Clara Bennett, spoken in the same sentence as Robert Bennett's legacy. I wasn't just going to stand on the sidelines anymore. I wasn't just going to be the outsider. I had a place in the world now, and the truth had made it clear. It was mine. Eli walked up beside me, a slight grin on his face as he looked up at the building. He had been by my side from the start, through every twist and turn, and now, standing here, I realized just how much he had meant in helping me get here. "You're looking good," Eli said, nudging me lightly with his elbow. Like someone about to take on the world, I couldn't help but chuckle. "It's just a press conference." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Just a press conference. Clara, this is a historic moment. You're about to be officially recognized as the rightful heir to the gallery, not to mention the fight you've won." "Yeah, well, it doesn't feel as grand as I thought it would," I said, giving him a look. "I thought I'd feel more, I don't know, vindicated or something." "You will," Eli said, his voice full of reassurance. "But give it time. Right now, it's just about standing in front of people who underestimated you for so long and letting them see you take the reins. I didn't say anything to that. I just nodded, feeling a strange calm take over. The last few months had been a whirlwind. Fighting Martin, recovering my inheritance, watching everything I'd lost come back piece by piece. Now, standing here, it was all about the next step. It was about moving forward, rebuilding, and stepping into the role I was meant to play all along. We walked inside, and I could feel the eyes on me. The reporters glanced over, some with raised eyebrows, some with curiosity. No one knew exactly what to expect from me yet, but today, I was about to show them. As the press gathered, I stood at the podium, ready to speak. Henry was sitting in the front row with a small smile, a quiet nod of approval in his eyes. I wasn't sure how I would have made it through without his support. The past was full of fractured relationships, but I had gained new allies, ones who had stood by me when everything seemed impossible. The mayor stood up beside me, offering me a respectful nod before addressing the crowd. Today, we gather to recognize Clara Bennett, a woman who has not only fought for the truth, but also fought to preserve the legacy of one of our city's most respected figures. Clara's determination has proven that family ties, when built on integrity and honor, can stand the test of time. The mayor turned to me then, signaling for me to speak. I took a deep breath, readying myself. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady. "I'm here today not just as a co-heir of Robert Bennett's gallery, but as someone who fought for what was right. I've spent the last few months uncovering lies, exposing truths, and watching everything I thought I had lost come back. But this isn't just about me, it's about the future. It's about preserving the gallery's integrity and honoring the legacy of someone who believed in art, in culture, and in truth. Robert didn't just build this gallery to showcase art. He built it to protect something far more valuable, our collective history." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. I glanced around the room at the faces in front of me, some skeptical, some eager, but all waiting to hear what I had to say. "I know my name wasn't always welcomed here. I know I've been seen as an outsider by some," I continued, my gaze steady. "But today, I stand before you, not as an outsider, but as a part of this city's future. I'm here to tell you that the Bennett Gallery is not just a place for art. It's a place for truth. And moving forward, I will ensure that legacy is never compromised again." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of my words sinking in. I could feel the tension in the air, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I wasn't speaking to win approval. I was speaking because it was the truth. I had earned this moment. "Thank you," I said, stepping back from the podium. A round of applause broke out, some half-hearted, some genuine. But in that moment, I didn't need their applause. I had found my place. The gallery was mine to protect, to rebuild, to shape into something more than it had ever been. I walked off the stage, my heart pounding with pride, but also with something else. Peace. I had found my truth, and in doing so, I had found my future. Eli joined me as I walked toward the back of the room. "You were great," he said with a smile. "That's exactly what they needed to hear." I smiled back, though there was a quiet intensity in my gaze. "It's not about them, it's about the gallery. It's about keeping Robert's vision alive." Eli nodded, the understanding between us unspoken. "You've done more than that. You've made it your own." I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for him in that moment. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had supported me, who had fought alongside me. We were building something real. As we stepped out into the courtyard of City Hall, the light was breaking through the clouds. The future wasn't just a distant idea. It was here, in front of me, and it was mine to shape. I took a deep breath and looked around, feeling the weight of what I had just accomplished. And in that moment, I realized something else. I had finally set the story straight. And for the first time, I was exactly where I was meant to be.